Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. By means of introduction, my name is Clark Hopley. I'm the Client Success Partner here at KINNECT, and I'm joined by a couple of my fellow colleagues, namely Dr Scott Wilkinson, Val Garrity, and Katrina. We thank you for your attendance today. And look, today is all about Safer Together Medicals. So we're going to be discussing the origins of the Safer Together Medical Framework, the recent changes, and how organisations can best align to the updated framework. But before we dive into the session, I'll just mention that today is not by any means a lecture. So we want this to be interactive. We want it to be a practical session. So if you have any questions along the way, please raise your hand, either virtually or literally, however you best deem fit. A bit of background on the Safer Together framework. It was an initiative that was established in 2014 by leaders across Australia's onshore and offshore oil and gas industry. And it had the vision of creating a unified industry-wide approach to safety. One key outcome of this collaboration was the development of a fitness to work medical assessment guideline, which was designed to ensure consistency and quality in medical assessments for workers in safety critical roles. The latest revision, which they aptly named Revision 2.0, was released in February earlier this year. And this update introduced a standardised fit slip, and it also strengthened several governance requirements of the Safer Together framework. The aim of this revision was to enhance consistency between operators, reduce duplication, and make it easier for organisation and providers alike to demonstrate compliance with the Safer Together medical framework. So the goal of today's session is to help you understand what's changed, why these updates were introduced, and how your organisation can engage with and implement the new framework moving forward. And to do this, we have Dr Scott Wilkinson on the call. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott. Scott brings more than 3 decades of experience across clinical, corporate, and remote medicine. He's also held senior leadership roles with ConocoPhillips, International SOS, and Corporate Protection Australia Group, where he oversaw the clinical governance and the delivery of health services in often complex and remote environments. Scott's career has spanned international assignments in both Vietnam and Papua New Guinea, providing medical oversight for large-scale industrial projects and hands-on general practice for both metropolitan and regional Australia. Scott is passionate about supporting high-quality remote healthcare, and outside of work enjoys life on his cattle property in New South Wales, along with some cross-country skiing and gravel bike riding. So please help me welcome Scott to today's session, who will take us through the recent changes and hopefully share some insight. I should mention that Scott also was an active participant in the Safer Together working group, so he's well versed on the framework itself. So Scott, thank you for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks, Clark. Yeah, oh, well, what a welcome. Yeah, I think I may know some of the attendees, so hi to those I know and hi to those I don't. Nice to meet you. I don't think this is going to be a long presentation. I want to go through the basics of the Safer Together medical framework and where we're at now, and then most importantly, answer any questions you've got. But I suppose in this, I'm not representing Safer Together, having left that health working group. So, you know, I know what I know. What I will also say is that there is a 2.1 coming very shortly. So what we're talking about may change a little bit, but I know what the changes are, and they're minor rather than anything too significant. So you can see what I want to cover today, and let's crack on with it. But at the end of it, I hope that you'll know what medicals are available and what you should be choosing for each of your worker groups. Why do we have a Safer Together medical framework? Well, it came about when the industry really looked at some of the evacuations that were happening over the span of Australia, and so many of them were not actually related to an injury at work so much as pre-existing conditions and conditions that weren't identified that became an issue in the field. And more than half of medical evacuations over the last few years that required helicopters were for things like chest pain, shortness of breath or abdominal pains and various conditions, not those things that you might think, such as motor vehicle accidents or workplace injuries. So it was accepted that anyone that could not be guaranteed of an evacuation in less than 4 hours should or could have a safer together medical that looked at their fitness to work in those environments. And we know certainly that if you can identify pre-existing conditions before that person arrives on the site, you're in a much better position to control that person's medical status. And if something were to go wrong, you've got some information. Yeah, so that's where it sort of came from in the early days. So the purpose, as Clark has mentioned some of these already, by having a consistent medical that is industry approved, we hope to be able to reduce the incidence of serious illness and death amongst our workers. And unfortunately, some of us have probably been touched by just those things in the workplace. We wanted to standardize the fit for work rather than having these multiple assessments that were out there and are still out there, having one that the industry can say, yes, we agree that this is what we want to use as our standard. And hopefully to allow contractors and operators to have a single fit slip that would be accepted across multiple work sites. So by doing that and having a fit for work status that was recognized across different companies, we would be reducing complexity. We could also start to have a predictable framework for doctors to work to, so that they know what's a pass and what's a fail, or what we should be looking at as something that may need further investigation. We hope that by having a single format, we can reduce the cost for operators and contractors and the time it takes to put our workers through these, as well as managing the contracts and trying to work out how you specify in a contract what an individual worker needs to ensure their fitness for work. So moving on from that, what does being fit for work mean? It means different things to different people, but I suppose in the framework of Safer Together, we want to understand as best we can what are the pre-existing health conditions an individual might have, not so that we can fail them, it's so that we can identify, and then in conjunction with understanding the work role of that individual and the deployment and how remote they are, decide how we can best service that individual worker and the contracting company or the operator to get that person out into the field. This is not about failing. This is about supporting workers. So by having the first two of those building blocks, we can put conditions or restrictions in place, hopefully, that will allow that worker to be in that workplace. Or it may be that we say they're not fit right now. They need some additional investigations or treatment, and then come back and we can look at it again. In the Safer Together medical, there are a range of both questionnaires and assessments that we do. But I do want to, I suppose, clarify that it's not, this is the basics that we as the industry group thought was appropriate for the remote workers. It doesn't have a full functional capacity assessment. So, that's something that I know some of you have probably found after the fact that it, you didn't have that in there. So you just need to be aware. It doesn't have a drug and alcohol screen. So it's the basic building block that you might want to then add to for your specific circumstances and location. Some of these things are optional depending on where or what sort of work they're doing. For example, the screening for sleep apnea. Not everyone gets that. So we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Hopefully that's fairly obvious to you. So released in January, February of this year is the new version 2.0, soon to be updated to 2.1. But really some of the main points were, we firstly, for the doctors and nurses that were doing the examinations, we tried to get a guideline that was more succinct. It was really wordy, really hard for the medical examiners to actually go through. So that was reduced. We then reduced the numbers of forms for both the workers that they need to fill out, as well as for the examining doctors and nurses. And we added in something looking more specifically at sleep apnea, which is a really important condition in our industry to identify for fatigue, and we know it's a cause of multiple accidents. So we changed that a little bit. We then changed the fit slip. So I'll show you an example of the fit slip later. Rather than having two, one for the West Coast, one for the East Coast, we combined them and made it hopefully a little more clear as to which one you might need. So there's a few different other changes, but let's not go into them. I cover this off a little bit later. This slide pack will be coming, by the way, to anyone that wants it, so you can have a look at this in more detail if you need. All right, in the fit slip at the end, we now have three options that the nurse or doctor can sign: fit unconditional, no issues; fit with certain conditions or modifications. And yeah, often that's going to be, we want you to be seen more frequently than the 3-yearly mark. That's the maximum. So we want you to come back with a report from your cardiologist, such as this one, and then the doctor or nurse will stamp it. So what sort of medicals do you need to consider when you're ordering? Everyone needs to have that general assessment. That's the basic that everyone gets, anyone that's working in a remote or isolated location. And then it's just a matter of which ones you're going to add on. So for anyone that will be wearing respiratory protection, we recommend that they need the respiratory protection module, which is not very big at all. It's just another questionnaire for the worker to fill in, and then they do some spirometry and you know, a bit of a more examination by the nurse and the doctor. And then for anyone that will be either crane operating or driving machinery or vehicles on site, the stop bang or sleep apnea assessment is also recommended. So yeah, it's really the general plus the other two is the way to think about it. So it starts with a Safer Together referral form, unless if you're working in the KINNECT universe, then you will just order through the portal. So you may not ever see this referral, but it's more, I wanted to have it there so you know that that's how Safer Together you know, starts the process with a referral form. And again, sorry, it's really small, but you just need to pick which type of assessment you want. Is it just is it just for the remote or isolated location, which is a general assessment, or if they're using their respiratory equipment or they're operating the machinery, then that will determine the additional tests. And then you do need to, in the KINNECT environment, you'll also need to just identify what sort of sign-off you want. Sign-off A is with an occupational doctor. So that's because some contracting companies, as you may know, require that, particularly for offshore, but a lot of them don't. And when I was working at ConocoPhillips, we were very happy with sign-off B, which was a doctor or an experienced registered nurse could do the sign-off. So that might be a cost saving for you. The end result is this fit slip that I mentioned, and that is going to have the name of the individual, what the assessment was for, you know, is it for remote work, and can they, can you use it for, well, the T-Bosiet for helicopter underwater training is a separate one. Can they use mobile equipment? And then this section here, for those that are traveling offshore with helicopters, the bideltoid measurement is really just to make sure that they're small enough to fit inside the helicopter, and then the doctor or nurse will fill out the fit boxes at the bottom. So it's pretty straightforward. I thought I'd take you through an example just so that it sort of clarifies how this works, because there's forms for the worker to fill out, there's examinations for the medical team to fill out, and then there's the fit slip. So let's say we have an imaginary crane operator that we've decided is going to go work remotely, and the operator of that site is happy for fit slip B, which is the nurse or doctor sign off. So if I click the animation, what we're saying is that this person is going to fit this box here, mobile equipment, which includes the crane operator. So there'll be a tick for form A, which is the general health questionnaire. There's a tick for medical examination A, and then there's a tick to do the sleep apnea score So that's all that happens is that worker fills out one form and we'll have to do two examinations, examination 1 and examination 3. And because we've said that person can have a nurse fit slip sign off, they can do sign off B. So hopefully that makes some sense. It's just you determine what the role is, and that's going to determine what that person needs to fill in. Let's just say they didn't need to be mobile equipment operator, but they needed to wear respiratory protection. They would have these 4 ticks. They would have to fill in a tight seal respiratory questionnaire as well, and they would have to do the 2 examinations, the general assessment and the respiratory assessment. Okay, and then there's a cheat sheet. So that's going to be available in the slide pack. Hopefully many of you will be able to fit your worker groups into these different work categories, and that will tell you, number 1, what forms you need to ask your workers to fill in and take to their appointment, and number 2, what examinations they may be asked to undertake once they arrive. Right, so that's it in terms of the the framework and understanding what medicals are about. It might have made things less clarified for you. I'd be interested to hear what questions you might have, because it really comes down to specifics, and some I'll be able to answer. Some we may need to take on notice and get back to you on. But I'll pass it back to you, Clark, if you like.
Yeah, Scott, if you wouldn't mind, and we are open to questions, but if you wouldn't mind me starting with the first, because often as a provider, we get questions on this, regularly. The choice to use either an occupational physician or a registered doctor, an occupational health doctor, because the previous framework had it that it was always an occupational physician if it was in Western Australia or Northern Territory, but in Queensland you had the option. Could you talk to, I guess, is it the employer's choice, the client's choice? And if they're a contractor, do they have to then abide by what the client is instructing said contractor to follow? Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Okay, so in the end, it is deemed it's a requirement usually of the contractor company or the operator, sorry. So for any of the offshore platforms, generally they are going to be required to have an occupational physician sign off, fit slip A. So that is a requirement, of the operator. And if you try and give them a fit slip with fit slip B signed off, they won't accept it. So our advice from the Safer Together point of view is to always talk to your operator to understand what their minimum requirements are. I mean, why doesn't everyone just get fit slip A? Well, it's a cost issue potentially. So that's why the option to have fit slip B was introduced. And many of the East Coast operators and sites just don't need fit slip A. So the problem is, we're trying to get this fit slip to be usable across, multiple sites. But if you've got a B, some of those sites won't be accessible for that worker because they didn't get the fit slip A sign off. So it's an imperfect solution to multiple requests by the operating companies and contractors to try and reduce costs for those that don't need it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's generally driven by the operator, and it's generally an offshore requirement. But some of the West Coast companies, I know, operators, even onshore, do want that fit slip A.
Thank you, Scott. Val had a question that, would you mind commenting on doing Safe Together medicals for existing workers, that is periodic medicals? So the requirement around the period, the periodicity.
Yes. So look, I see this in the industry. I think a lot of companies, let's be honest, will employ a worker. They do a pre-employment of some description, which might just be the Safer Together medical. They might do a little bit more, including a drug and alcohol. And then I've seen it that these companies actually, they just forget to do periodic medicals. The worker is in the workplace. They're not, unless they're prompted by the operator or whoever runs that site, to have an updated periodic medical. They just don't get done. But the Safer Together framework says it's only valid for 3 years maximum, all things being equal, it will expire and a fresh one is needed. And using a Safer Together medical as a periodic medical is not, I don't think, a bad option. It covers the bases. If an issue is identified, it will be requested to be expanded on by the examining doctor or nurse. So I think any periodic medical is better than none. And if you were to use the Safer Together medical as your periodic, I think you could do a lot worse. But just bear in mind, it's not extensive, in that spirometry is not standard across. You may not get a spirometry done. Do you need that for a periodic? Well, it depends on the worker's role. But it's more extensive than, let's say, the Colborne medical periodics. It's in many ways, better than that. I don't know if that answers your question, Val.
Yes, that was good. And I just take, sort of my memory of going to some of those early Safer Together meetings, and there was a lot of talk around, we do a good job of pre-employment medicals, but then we've got people that, we never look at again, and, they're on site and they, get medical issues. And if there was to take your point earlier, a cardiac event when someone was on site and remote and they hadn't had a medical for some time, then that can cause some issues, of course.
Yeah, I am a big believer in periodic medicals, but not overdoing it. But yeah, as I said, I've seen it so many times that you have employees that have been in the same job for 20 years, working remotely. They got a great medical done 20 years ago, but things have moved on, and we've got that aging workforce issue that we're all very aware of. The difficulty then, of course, and it is an HR one and an IR one, is what do you do with someone who you identify a new medical condition during a periodic medical, and how do you support that worker if you actually deem that they're no longer able to do the role that they're currently in? So they're things that we do face, and they just have to be dealt with compassionately. But in the end, it's about safety for not just themselves but the rest of the workforce.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. That was helpful. Appreciate it.
If there's any questions from the audience, please feel free to submit them via the Q&A function. But Scott, while we wait for that, the bideltoid measurement is something that is raised a fair amount, and there's often some confusion around which workers require a bideltoid, particularly in the completion of the fit slip. Do you mind just touching on that?
Yeah, look, I'll be honest, I'm not sure that as a working group that was really thought through as best it could be. Certainly those operators who are flying people offshore in helicopters generally want it, but it's not a requirement. So anyone having that will be working offshore, we would recommend the bideltoid is done, but it's not a requirement to be passed fit for a standard Safer Together medical if there's no helicopter travel. So I think that needs a little bit of clarity in the guidelines. You are more than welcome as an employer not to get the bideltoid measurement done. It's such a quick process. It's just literally a tape measure and measure. So if there's any doubt, just put it in there. But it's not a requirement unless they're going to be going offshore, to my knowledge.
And I'd probably like to expand on that, Scott. The previous guidelines, there was lack of clarity around how that measurement was taken, but there has been a change in the new guidelines where it's just a simple tape measure across the shoulders, midline of the deltoid to the opposite side, getting that measurement. So it's a lot easier now to achieve for a lot of providers.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, that was a KINNECT initiative to ask for that clarity. So yeah, well done on that.
Scott, sleep apnea and mobile equipment operators, there's often some, I wouldn't say confusion, but just from an understanding perspective, what is the purpose for a stop bang? And why are we doing this with the mobile equipment operators? What are the risks and what are we trying to mitigate?
Yeah, okay. And again, I will say, yeah, I'm not the sleep apnea expert, but the earlier versions of the medicals looked at sleepiness scores, the Epworth sleepiness score, which is something that we use in practice quite a bit. And it's just questions around, how easily do you fall asleep in certain situations? And a high score meant that you may have an issue with your sleep, and we would then recommend further investigation. Stop Bang, which is an acronym, was designed in Toronto, Canada, after research, and it has been shown to be really good at identifying those that might be at higher risk of sleep apnea. And so for those that don't know, sleep apnea is that it's actually a range of medical conditions where you have you either have impaired breathing or stop breathing overnight, and with subsequent drops in oxygen levels. And what that can do is, number one, cause increased levels of drowsiness and fatigue during the day, decreased concentration, and it increases your risk of high blood pressure, of diabetes, I think of dementia as well. So there's a huge number of effects that undiagnosed sleep apnea has, and it's an incredible number of percentage of particularly males have it. So we look at neck circumference, if it's more than a certain amount of centimeters, if you're older, if you're male, if you're overweight, and if you snore. There's a range of questions that we ask, but it's done because it's been identified through occupational health groups as a really important measure of marker of risk of impaired concentration, alertness, and energy levels. And of course, what we're trying to avoid is incidents, injuries, and accidents in the field. So crane operators in particular, isolated, on their own a lot of the time, and catastrophic if one of those people falls asleep at the wrong time. Same for heavy operators, and really anyone we think driving on a site could be put in that same category.
Wonderful. Is there any questions from anyone in the audience? Don't be shy.
Pretty dry subject, I know. And it gets gone through a few iterations, but the aim was to try and make it simpler. So you really just got to work out which of those three assessments need doing. Everyone gets that first one. So it's really, do they need a stop bang or a sleep apnea questionnaire? Do they need the respiratory questionnaire? They're really the only two things and then which fit slip sign off does your operator require?
And Scott, if we can just finish on one final question, the expectation you mentioned of a drug and alcohol or functional assessment being completed, it's not a requirement under the Safer Together framework, but employers and or clients or operators have the ability to request a drug and alcohol or a functional assessment or even a vaccination aligning with the Safer Together framework.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the basic set of questions and examinations that the industry group felt was required to be, fit for work. But we all know, functional assessments of someone's ability to do the actual job is, I think, really important. Drug and alcohol tests are important. That they're an industry standard these days. So yes, adding on bits and pieces together with blood tests for lead or whatever it might be, health surveillance monitoring, in addition to the basic medical is often done. Yeah.
And just on that note, the cardiovascular risk scores, which forms part of the Safer Together framework, can you just touch on what that is designed to do? Why are we doing it? What risk, again, are we trying to reduce or eliminate?
Yeah, well, I suppose in a nutshell, we're trying to limit the number of events that we're going to have in the field that are cardiac related, and sadly, they are the ones that we've often seen ending up in deaths on site. So it's not just for the heart; it's also for the risk of a stroke, which is catastrophic as well. So that's it's just there's a great website and calculator that's been developed in Australia, and it uses a number of different factors, which does include cholesterol levels, which is why cholesterol is part of the Safer Together medical. And then all those measurements, including blood pressure and your gender, etc., are plugged in, and you get a percentage risk of an event over the next 5 or 10 years. And then we have an algorithm in the Safer Together medical framework which just says, if you're above a certain risk profile, then we want additional information. If you're below this, and we say you're fit. If you're below 30 years of age, you don't even need one generally, unless you've got other risk factors. So it's just another way of trying to stratify risk and determine whether someone's okay or not to be sent out to those wonderful sites that we see our workers going to.
Thank you, mate. Thank you kindly. Is there any final questions? Just letting everyone know that we'll be sharing the slide deck following this meeting. Will also be posted on the KINNECT website, so you will have access to it. We're also going to share the transcript and the video from today's session, and Katrina's been kind enough to put my details up there. So if there's any further questions following today's session, any queries, no question's a silly question. I'd be more than happy to escalate anything to Scott or our doctors for some advice and opinions and share that back with you promptly. But thank you everyone for attending. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully it provided some level of knowledge and information, and we look forward to running another session in the near future on a different topic.